If you've ever found yourself staring at your phone, waiting for a response, waiting for a reply, telling yourself not to message them again, not to bombard them with a long paragraph explaining how you're feeling and why it doesn't feel good that they haven't responded to you in a very timely manner, and you can't physically relax until you get a response from them, then this episode is most definitely for you. Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. I feel like I'm in a place of really going in on understanding anxious attachment and really leaning into what anxious attachment means, how that might show up for you in your relationships. And that's probably a sign of a lot of the client work that I'm doing at the moment. And there seems to be a very common theme of how anxious we are becoming in our relationships, especially when we are in dynamics with people who are either emotionally unavailable or who haven't done the work, or maybe just people who are going through their own issues of childhood trauma and don't know how to communicate their emotions in a way that helps us to feel understood, valued, and validated. That being said, sometimes you don't always need to go all the way in with a very in-depth therapy session. Maybe because you've had therapy before, or maybe because it's just a blip in the road, or you've got a certain situation, a certain situationship that is calling for some outside perspective, perhaps a reality check that's not just from a friend, coming from a place of wanting the best for you, but also having the psychological aspect of understanding the patterns in relationships and how you can actually shift from moving in a more anxious way to moving in a more secure, self-assured way. And that's something that I've seen in my client work recently, where sometimes I've been working with someone for a certain amount of time, and maybe for whatever reason, they've decided that it's the end of their therapeutic journey, but something might come up and then they might just need to have a little check-in. They might need to come back for just reassessing where they're at and getting back on track again, because that's so easy to do when we don't always have that accountability. And so for this summer, I'm also offering, rather than just having the option of going deeper into having one-to-one weekly, fortnightly therapy sessions where it's just a one-off session. And in this one-off session, it's more of a coaching style of being able to talk through where you're at, understand that, but also get a plan of action of what you can do moving forward, whether that is more healing steps you need to take, practical solutions of, okay, these are the things that you can try in this dynamic, or things that you need to do that helps you to work on yourself so you can be more secure in your relationships, so you can feel more secure in yourself, and so you can stop chasing people who are avoidant or somewhat detached. Usually when I'm going to work with a client more long term, we'll have an introductory call, we'll see if we're a good fit. We'll have our first assessment session, and we'll kind of state a plan of action for ongoing therapy moving forward. But that's not always the only way that you can get to move forward. And sometimes you might just need something a little bit more short term, something a little bit more solution focused without going too much into the past or too much into the history. And so that is where you can book a one-off session with me. The link to that is going to be in the show notes. There's only a certain amount of sessions that will be available for you to actually book, but you're not going to have to go through the process of having an intro call with me. You can just go straight to booking the session, finding a time that works for you, filling in the online form just so that I've got a bit of context around what our session is about. We will have a 90-minute session, and then I will also follow that up with what your action plan steps are and just checking in with you about 10 to 14 days after the appointment, just to make sure that I've got the accountability piece for you, so that you're not just going to have the session and then either forget about what we've discussed or just do nothing with it. There's a follow-up plan for you to actually put some of those things in action. So if you want to book one of those sessions, go ahead and check the details of this episode, and the link to book your slot will be in there. It's an intro offer, so there is a bit of a discount on that at the moment. So if you want to snap up that discount rate, then you might want to move fast on that. That is my offering for the summer, because the summer tends to be a bit of a wind down time for not all therapists, but some therapists. And so that's what I tend to do over the summer. I tend to take a little bit of time off for self-care. It's also my birthday in the month of August, so I make sure that I use the summer to also work on pouring back into myself, because September, October, leading up to Christmas tends to be quite a busy time in terms of therapy and taking on new clients. And I don't want my whole summer to just come and go without me taking some time to replenish myself, so that I can actually continue to do the work that I do and essentially not burn out. So it's a good act of self-care and practice that I think you should be aware that that's what your therapist has to consider and think about as well. And maybe if you are a therapist listening to this, this is your reminder to schedule that break, to take that time off, because as we know, burnout can be a very difficult thing to overcome and to move past and to get through. So let's get back to today's episode, because what I wanted to talk about was why it's so difficult for people with anxious attachment to self-soothe when they are triggered, when they have those feelings of rejection, when they experience abandonment, why it's so hard for them to actually self-regulate their emotions, self-regulate their feelings, and not look for that validation and acceptance from external sources or external people. If you've ever found yourself staring at your phone, waiting for a response, waiting for a reply, telling yourself not to message them again, not to bombard them with a long paragraph explaining how you're feeling and why it doesn't feel good that they haven't responded to you in a very timely manner, and you can't physically relax until you get a response from them, then this episode is most definitely for you. So self-soothing isn't about pretending that you're fine or using unhealthy distraction, but it's the ability for you to be able to stay with your own emotions without necessarily needing somebody else to feel responsible or be responsible for fixing those feelings for you. And for people with anxious attachment, this can often feel unsafe, because as a child, that calm and that reassurance and that validation often only came after connection. And so the reason why you're seeking that connection so much is because that's what helps you to feel calm again, and that's what helps you to feel safe. And sometimes you can force that process, you can push that process because you want it so much. You're trying to get through the anxiety and the uncertainty and the discomfort into a place of feeling, okay, like now I can relax, now I can breathe, now I don't feel anxious anymore, now I feel safe. And it's very likely that you were wired to believe that closeness meant survival, and that your ability to feel calm and your ability to feel safe, your ability to feel validated and seen came through others. It came through your relationship with other people. It came from them making you feel better. But because the root of anxious attachment is based in inconsistent caregiving, or a parent being there sometimes and then other times not being there, or being there but with conditions, so perhaps showing connection or validation as long as you do something that they approve of, or as long as you're behaving in a way that feels acceptable to them, as long as you're being quote unquote the good girl. And so it teaches your nervous system that you can only feel safe when you are in connection. When you then experience somebody pulling away, or some form of distancing, or somebody just seems like they're not as attentive as they used to be, they don't show up for you as much as they used to, or perhaps they're cancelling plans on you, or the energy and the vibe just feels off, where they're just not as connected as what they used to be. You read that as a sign of that means danger. That triggers a panic in you. And it's not just because you're clingy or that you have this neediness to be close to people, but it's also because your body has learned that separation for you means almost like emotional danger. That feeling of being under threat or that feeling of panic doesn't feel very nice. That feels like emotional danger to you. So self-soothing, what does that actually mean? So it's essentially you coming back to yourself and you reminding yourself that you are safe and that you are not in any danger. And we do that through not just through cognitively telling ourselves. In one aspect, that can be helpful to some people at some times, but also where it has more of a lasting impact, and a lot of research is backing this up more and more in recent years, is that it's more about what's happening within our nervous systems. And so as much as we can know logically that we are safe, we also have to give our bodies the physical cues of understanding and recognizing what safety feels like. That's how we regulate our nervous systems. I'm getting tongue-tied. Self-soothing is not necessarily cold plunges and breathing apps, although they can be helpful for sure. But it's moving towards things that are more like naming the feeling and just being able to stay with it, sit with it, and be curious about it. It can be about putting your phone down and moving your body, becoming more present, because quite often when we are anxious and our nervous systems are going into our fight-flight response, you can become very disconnected from what's happening in your body. You can almost get too stuck in your head with overthinking and perhaps remuneration of overthinking things, replaying worst case scenarios, catastrophizing the situation, and that's all very unhelpful in being able to regulate your nervous system. So it does help to reframe some of those thoughts, and sometimes thinking about thoughts that are based more on reality rather than our perception of the situation. But there's also the part of the nervous system part of self-soothing, which is often missing from people who have anxious attachment, because you're more likely to look for self-soothing in others. You're more likely to look for somebody else to make you feel better. So that text message that you're looking for, that reassurance that you're looking for, that you need to know that you are important, to know that you are cared for, to know that you're not being left out, you're not being neglected. That validation is seeking something outside of you. And as someone with anxious attachment, a really good focus of your healing is about learning how you can self-soothe. So it doesn't mean that you don't look towards other people, you don't look at co-regulation. And co-regulation is looking at how do you reconnect with somebody else or something else, whether that is through a relationship, whether that is with a pet, talking to a friend, connecting with someone, trying to connect with people over social media as well, for example. It's not that you're not doing those things as well, but what I see happens, or what does happen, is in attachment, anxious attachment, you tend to overly focus on the co-regulation. And self-regulation is how you self-soothe, or self-soothing is how you self-regulate. So instead of focusing on how other people can make you feel good, how something else can make you feel better, it's looking at how do I help myself to feel better in this moment? How do I help myself to feel calm in this moment? What helps me to feel safe? What feels good to me in this moment? And the goal isn't to never need anyone, but the goal is to recognize that you can be there for yourself too. And when it comes to healing, this will look a bit different if you have an avoidant attachment. Because if you are an avoidant attachment person, or you have more avoidant attachment traits, you are more than likely really good at the self-regulation. You're very good at self-soothing. You're used to doing that work on your own. So it's almost like the healing process of each different attachment style of anxious and avoidant has a bit of a different approach. So with the anxious attachment, you need to focus more on the self-regulation, self-soothing, and avoidant attachment, they tend to need to work more on the co-regulation, finding that co-regulation in relationships with other people, because they are so used to just doing that internal work, if they bother to do it at all, by themselves. And when you are practicing this, it's a good idea to start in low stakes moments and not waiting until you are super triggered super agitated, really in the trenches of spiraling and your thoughts going down a rabbit hole. If you wait until that moment, you've probably waited too long. So it's trying to find those moments of being able to self-soothe when you're already at a place of being fairly regulated. You're cool, you're not being triggered at that time. So maybe you try it out with a friend that you know that you can trust. So for example, instead of waiting for a friend to text you immediately wanting a response or thinking, oh my God, something terrible's happened to them if you don't get a timely response back, just sitting back with that and working on, okay, how do you self-soothe in that moment to help yourself feel better so that you're not expecting the other person to respond quicker for you to feel calm again. And it can be really easy to try and move into a place of distraction and trying to do something that takes your mind off of it. But there also has to be a balance with that, because when you are distracting yourself, that can also be seen as you either minimizing your experience or just not listening to what your nervous system needs or what you might need relationally. And you ignoring how you feel or pretending like it's not there, that doesn't help to validate, and it doesn't help to just acknowledge your experience. And self-acknowledgement is also a big part of self-soothing. And if you just want a bit of accountability with that and learning how you can start doing that for yourself without going super deep and having a whole therapy session going into your childhood for the next 5 to 6 months, you can book a one-off session. It's a therapy intensive for 90 minutes. You'll get that time with me, and after you'll get a follow-up email just to reinforce what your action steps are. So if you want to book and schedule your time for that therapy intensive, go ahead and click that link in the show notes to book your time. That's it for today's episode. Catch you in the next one. Bye. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.